Harriet Jeanette Snyder was born on February 25, 1912, to Robert and Harriet Jeanette James Snyder. She was born on a farm on Town Line Road by Clinton, Wisconsin, that was originally homesteaded by her great-grandfather. She had two younger sisters, Esther and Marjorie. Jeanette began kindergarten in Clinton, Wisconsin. Her father bought a little two-seater surrey that the girls drove the 3.5 miles to town. During the day, the horse, Betty Blossom, was sheltered in her grandparents' horse barn, a short walk from school. In bad weather, she recalls snow covering the fence posts, and they either stayed at her grandparents' or their dad chauffeured them in his sleigh cutter. Later, her grandfather taught her to drive an automobile when she was only 14 years old. So as a senior, she drove herself to school in a stylish, greenish-blackish Nash.
Well, I guess probably I begged him to. He lived in town, and he would come out to the farm and putter around, and I'd tag along, and so I guess I got interested in a car, and eventually by down our lane he let me drive or steer the car, and I can remember there was an open field, and I got to drive off the lane into the field and around so that I could start it and stop it.
So then you drove to high school after that?
Yes.
Wow, did you take a whole carload of people with you? Your sister, or?
No, I had to be very careful about letting people ride with me. But after it helped getting me to school, and then taking my sisters, Esther and Marjorie, to school too. So it helped a little with my driving.
And you also told me you're a bit of a tomboy. You didn't go to the barn.
No.
But you're a bit of a tomboy. What does that mean exactly? What kind of things did you do?
Well, during haying, I drove a team of horses on the hay fork.
Wow.
And every summer, that was my job, so I had to not plan any other activity until the haying was done. And then when it was time for harvesting grain, I sat on the binder, I guess it was called, and I tripped, pushed a lever with my foot, and so the bundles, to line up the bundles so that they could be chopped with the grain. So that was during the heat of summer, I would say.
Oh, yeah.
It was very, very warm, and my father would drive the tractor, and generally we had a bottle of cold water because we would get quite dry. So that took care of my summer quite a bit.
Oh, I bet. Now, but you were also very ladylike. You said you didn't go to the barn on a regular basis. I have seen some of your dresses, some dresses from you and your sister's collection when we had a show here at the church. I remember you as being a very well-dressed young lady.
Well, possibly. My mother having more or less lived in the city, and she did sew, and she would, seemed as I remember, she would make a pleated skirt of wool material. I remember one was kind of a green and brown checked. And then she would find us like a midi blouse and to match. And that seemed to be kind of a uniform. We didn't call it a uniform, but it was worn every day.
This is what all the girls wore. I understand you had a marvelous time growing up on Delavan Lake. Did your family have a cabin there?
Yes, my grandparents used to go camping there at the Assembly Park. And eventually my grandfather a two-story house. And then they were married, and they built of their own around the lake. Maybe not at that particular area, but on the other side of the lake they built. And my mother in 1914, and so we could go and come as we wished, but in the July and August we rented the cottage to people that came from Chicago mostly. Would come out for a couple of weeks or short time. And so we would, after they left, we would go out and clean, get ready for the next tenants. So we were in and out during the summer in July and August, but the other months we could go anytime we wished.
Was that a special part of your girlhood, spending time on the lake? Do you have any memories?
Yes, oh yes, I learned to swim. All our family could swim. My mother and father swam. I can remember my father diving in and plump, splash. And then I was able to row a boat and take my sisters out, and we would catch fish, particularly bluegills off the pier. I remember laying on the pier and fishing for bluegills.
Now, you were also involved in camping. You went to a camp at Lake Geneva. Was that a Girl Scout camp that you went to?
Yes, in high school.
What was that? Where was it, and what was it like?
Lake Geneva. It was a Y camp from Beloit, Camp Eleanor. And there were 100 or so girls my age were there for a week. And there were various activities for us to be involved in. Sports and crafts and so forth.
Did you have a camp romance?
All girls.
All girls, no camp romances. Okay.
No, but we had a big dining room and a schedule to follow.
Mm-hmm. Was the camp quite formal in those days? Was it more like going to school?
Well, possibly, but it was too. We'd get acquainted with a lot of gals and form friendships.
Now, do you have a favorite childhood story you like to tell your kids and grandkids about what it was like to be in Clinton as a kid yourself? Are there any stories of your school days, for example?
Well, I used to come up and stay at my grandparents', and roller skating seemed to be the sport that was good any time of the year. We used to come down the big hill on roller skates.
Ooh.
And I remember we would, there was a joint in the cement, we would jump that.
Oh my gosh.
And I remember I had a lot of scarred knees, red knees. Didn't make all the jumps.
Were these the old kind of roller skates that required a key to put on?
Oh, yes.
Oh my goodness.
Yes, they had the key, but it was great. Yeah, I remember when we had cement roads, and there was opening between Floyd and Clinton. One of the gals, an older one, of course, skated from Clinton to Floyd.
Oh. What did you wear as a child, and how did that change over the years?
Well, we had knickers now and then. Men wore them, and women wore knickers in the summer. Came down below your knee with kind of a band to hold them there.
Okay.
And the men's knickers, I think, were very similar.
Mm-hmm. Would you have always worn dresses, though, to school or to church?
Yes. In the winter time, my mother would make the woolen, heavy, pleated, box pleated skirt for me. And then I would wear a midi blouse. I remember one year it was brown.
What is a midi blouse?
A midi blouse was like a sailor would wear, kind of a square collar.
Mm-hmm.
And one year I wore, I think, kind of a green and brown checked and a brown midi blouse all year, all winter. And another year it was blue. Blue, I remember those two outfits, day in and day out.
How many outfits would a young woman, a well-dressed young woman, have owned in those days? Nowadays our kids think they have to have an endless supply of clothes, but how many outfits would a well-dressed young woman have owned?
I don't know. My mother would go to once or twice a year to Bostwick's in Janesville, the store, and buy a good dress. And her sister in Minot, North Dakota, would do the same and Minot. And so many times their best dresses were very similar.
Oh,
It must have been the style.
as a child, were, oh, I know I was going to ask you that and come back to this. Was writing, you just mentioned that your mother and her sister wrote a great deal to each other. Were letters very important to people? There was no picking up the telephone to call each other. What role did letters play in staying in touch?
Oh yes, they stayed in touch.
Were letters very important for that? Is that how you learned how other family members fared elsewhere?
Yes, the letters with her sisters. She had a sister in Minneapolis too that had a daughter my age. So, but the sister in Dakota that had 2 sons.
Did you write to any of these cousins?
I could have exchanged holiday cards with my cousins.
After graduation from Clinton High School in 1930, Janette attended Rock County Normal School and taught the next 10 years in rural one-room schools surrounding Clinton with the initial salary of $70 a month. She drove 25 miles round trip to and from school in a Ford with a rumble seat. Responsibilities included bringing in the wood from the woodshed, building the fire in the huge black-bellied stove, taking out ashes, sweeping the floor, and Fridays treating the wood floor with sweeping compound.
Was it a one-room schoolhouse?
Yes,
And you were the only teacher in the building?
yes.
then? What was that like? Was that a huge, I mean, how old were you when you started doing this? How old were you when you started teaching at Murray School?
Well, that I don't. Age never makes any difference to me. I don't keep track.
Well, I just wonder, you graduated from high school when you were what, 16?
Yes, then I went to Rock County Normal
For 2 years.
1 year.
1 year.
And then I went, got a job at Rock Prairie, and that's in Johnstown.
Okay. Over by Rock Prairie Church.
Yes, it's
Okay.
right almost next to it. It's no hint now of the building.
Oh,
It has been taken over by and built on a home.
mhm.
They built a home on it. I was there for 3 years.
Okay.
And at starting salary of $70.
Oh, for the whole school year?
And I had to get a car. I got a Model T with a rumble seat that I drove from my home every day. I think it was around 25 miles.
How long did it take you to get there?
Not too long. I drove right along.
Around on you a little bit here. You must have been in your teens when you started teaching at Rock Prairie. Your upper teens, probably.
Could be.
Well, how much older were you than some of the students?
Well, I only wait to 8th grade.
Oh, okay. So there was a bit of a gap between you and some of
Yes, and all.
Tell me what it was like to try and teach everybody from 1st to 8th grade. Did you have a busy day? How did you manage it all?
Well, you have a lot of blackboard work on the blackboard, and then you have seat work, and then I think the older students get kind of caught up what they missed out from the lower grades on certain subjects maybe, and the lower grades learn what the upper grades are doing. It's something that kind of interchanges throughout all the grades.
I've seen some things that are really impressive to me about what students had to know to get out of 8th grade. What kinds of things did you expect 8th graders to have learned?
Well, quite a bit of geography, of course.
What was a key school? Tell me about that.
Well, I think it's been a long time ago. And I think it was working in broadcasts from Madison, from the State Department,
Okay.
into the classroom.
Oh, this is like the Ranger Mac radio program
Yes.
that was carried, and those kinds of broadcasts that
Yes.
were supposed to broaden
Yes.
the horizons of kids.
Yes.
Wonderful. Why did you get involved in that?
Well, I guess I was asked to by the county to do it. But that day we had to arrange the room a little different to seat the guests. And we, of course, used the radio in the morning schedule. But the thing was, I went to turn on the radio and it didn't come on.
Oh.
So I gave it a smack and it came on. And those teachers that I meet to this day remember the radio part of it.
The smack. Now, I see from your questionnaire that you and your husband were married at the Little Brown Church in Iowa.
Yes.
Tell me how that came about. Why did you choose to go all the way over there to get married?
Well, it just seemed one way to get away. And the expense wouldn't be as great as having a wedding, and neither of our parents had money, perhaps for a wedding, a big wedding. Although I'm sure that there could have been a local wedding, but many couples. Little Brown Church was very popular in those years, and so we thought, well, why not? So we got my sister, and now Harold was called Dick.
Yes, I saw that.
And so he went by, then everyone knew him as Dick. And his friend, who was Leroy Summers, and he lives in the Chicago area now, or has. To drive and be our attendants at the church. So there were two cars going, and it was a blistering hot day, the 1st of June in 1940. In order to go, we had to make quite a few arrangements, because school was not out at Murray School really, because there was always a big play day in the county when each school district students competed against one another. A big Rock County play day. And that was the day that, for 1940, for the play day. And so I got Mary and Larson Higgins to take care of my children at the play date so that I could go. So, and they entered in the various games for Murray. Well, we got to Iowa finally, and so we looked up the gentleman that issued marriage licenses in this town.
Mm-hmm. Nashua, isn't it?
No,
No?
we found out that the Little Brown Church was not in this county. And so our marriage license was no good. I still have it today. And so when we had to go on then to Nashville was quite a distance. And the day began to get later. We finally found the clerk to issue the license. And we got to the Little Brown Church finally, and it was about 8 o'clock at night. And I changed into my blue dress, and the music, there was a musician that played the wedding march, and the minister. And I remember I cried all during the service.
Aw.
Tears came down.
I gotta ask you, you have done some unconventional things in your life. Not, I don't mean that in a way that's disrespectful, but you have had the courage to do the things that were right for you. You taught for 10 years, raised your family, then you worked for another 10 years. You were on school board. You married maybe a little later because you worked for those 10 years in the schools, you said, so that would be from 18 to 28. How do you see that? Are you are you willing to be a little different in order to achieve the things you think are important? Is that a fair description?
Oh, I didn't think I was different. As someone said, I was a dreamer, but I followed through most of the time.
One of Janette's special talents is setting a fine table with her best linens and china. She was chairperson of the Clinton Bicentennial Committee in 1976. She was the first woman to hold a position on the Clinton School Board and served for 10 years. In 1993, she received the Senior Achievement Award. Janette was instrumental in the editing and publishing of the 1987 Clinton History book. Besides being a teacher and a farm wife, Janette organized and established the 6th grade outdoor week, which is still in existence. She organized the Clinton Betsy Hoyt chapter of DAR and has been a member for 40 years. She helped organize the Senior Citizens Group and still volunteers there on Thursday. And she is a member of the state, county, and local historical societies.
You've been very active in this church. Tell me a little about the different roles you've taken in church. The women's group especially, I think you were very active.
Well, I guess I enjoyed being with the women. I had wonderful, wonderful cooperation, and I think a lot of it helped being a friend of the ministers' wives. They could see my vision and gave me encouragement. I would save for different projects that were carried out, and that meant a lot. Of course, the ladies cooperated too. I didn't have any friction. That's different things that have been in. I've seemed to have avoided friction, and I think that's why I've been lucky.
I think you've also been charming and tactful.
Well, golden rule.
What kinds of projects did you accomplish for the church? Do you remember any of them? Can you tell me what some of the highlights were for you, things that got done here?
Well, one of the things, maybe one of the first things, we carpeted the basement floor.
Oh.
And that made it, well, you might say, warmer in the winter. And pleasing. Let's see, I guess we got curtains up. We tried to make it home-like. We had very good luck with fall suppers that we called smorgasbords. And we had very good attendance. Besides putting carpet on the floor, we put ceiling tile on the ceiling, and that helped the heating.
Yeah, and it
Of
creates a
the
cozy
room.
space too.
Yes, it helped a lot with the heating, and we bought a furnace, and having the furnace heat in the basement was, so we did quite a bit in the basement in fixing up the kitchen in various stages. When we started, we had a wood stove years ago and all. So the basement seemed to be kind of a main project. And then, of course, the upstairs lounge, we accomplished a lot up here with flooring and furniture, and then remodeling a lot with different projects. And then in '76, I gave up working because it so happened that I was chairman of the Clinton's bicentennial. And that was beginning to take quite a bit of dreaming and work.
Springbrook Farm was originally purchased by Janette's great-grandfather, Frederick Snyder, who came to Clinton in 1845 with his wife, 5 sons, and a daughter.
Story of why your family picked that location out here outside town for its farm. Why that spot?
Well, I think they were looking for water, springs. In New York State, they had, where they lived, were springs. And so they came looking for water. Possibly they wanted it for their stock. And it seemed as though at that period in time, people were just becoming interested in cows. and of course any stock would need water. They finally decided that they were satisfied with the water situation there, and so they purchased the land from Mr. Gates, who got the land from the government about 5 years before. And so, as I've been told, it was quite a bit of clearing had to be done.
So it was all raw
trees and all.
Okay.
And so I think they bought it for about $5 an acre, and it all came to about $1,200.
Oh my goodness.
And there was a log cabin, and I guess in a very few years they replaced it with the house. The spring water is clear, very clear, and it had been tested during the course of years to be pure. And they took limestone and enclosed the water so that it formed a creek, and they had the limestone cylinder, you might say, filled up, and they had then an overflow pipe, so that when it got so high, then the water would go out, flow out into another little enclosure that they made with the limestone. The first enclosure was a circle. The next enclosure they made was almost a square. And they enclosed that with limestone, and then had an overflow pipe for that to flow into a creek.
So they captured the water twice and then they used it throughout the property. And
Yes.
Pretty smart.
And then any map you will see that it flows into Turtle Creek, and then from Turtle Creek into the Mississippi, and so on. In the course of time, that if they would dam it up, they would be able to cut ice.
Mm-hmm.
And so every fall, first they built the dam, but every year they had to draw dirt in to keep it a certain level in order to get ice. And so that was a chore every fall.
Was the ice for their personal consumption on the farm, or did they sell the ice as well?
Well, they built an ice house for themselves, and Clinton then had two ice houses.
Oh.
And so they were able to harvest it. But harvesting ice is always in the coldest part of the winter.
Oh, yeah.
And I can remember when they cut ice that we would have extra help then, because one person would have to saw it and load when they would haul it in a bobsleigh, more or less, as in a load. And so it would have to be loaded there to at the near the dam, and we'd always have to get a horse shod, particularly to walk on the ice, because the horse would draw a marker to on top of the ice to show where it would be sawed. I remember the first war years that a neighbor boy, young man, worked for us, and he went to war, and my mother would write letters to him, and we followed the war, waiting for him to come home again.
Did he come home safely?
Yes, he did, and married and had a family. Then the last World War, we had we were rationed. I don't remember the first World War that we were, but the second we had stamps, and would take them to the store to shop with. And
did your mother have to change the way she shopped because of the rationing?
yes, my well, I had to. I was shopping at that time.
Oh, okay. And how did you adjust?
Well, you you were careful, thrifty maybe, more so. And not only food, but gasoline was also rationed.
How about in the church? Do you remember the church during the Second World War or in the Depression years leading up to it? Were there any changes? I'm thinking, did the church women get together and do anything to raise funds for any special causes? Were there a need to take care of more people who were homeless or poor during those years?
Well, of course, 1919, and before they were planning to put a basement in the church. There wasn't a basement. And I think we had in the kitchen wooden stove, and there was no electricity at that time. In the kitchen, it was more or less wood, and I think now and then a little coal.
Okay. Did you do any, during the Second World War, you said you were grown up and in your own, on your own at that, not on your own, but moving towards adulthood at that time. Do you remember doing any volunteer work related to the war?
No, only buying stamps. I guess, what were they called?
War bonds?
The,
They're probably gas stamps, something like that. Was it gas
no,
stamp?
War bonds?
this was investing. War stamps
War bonds.
to support the war.
Were they bonds or were they actually stamps that you bought in small?
Well, they were both.
They were both. Yeah, I
They,
think I heard about the stamps.
they came out, I think, we got one for $40
Okay,
invested.
okay.
Well, I think the golden rule, do unto others, you'd have them do unto you.